Well, hey there, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed this teaching. Now, let's get into the lesson.
This is part 2. Last week was part 1, and this is kind of part 2, some Holy Week highlights. And most people don't realize, and never been taught, something that's very Jewish and very practical and shows how much God plans ahead. But people don't know that Jesus, strictly speaking, was not eligible for a typical Jewish burial. Let me say that again. Most people have never been taught some strict Jewish practices that basically eliminates Jesus from having a typical Jewish burial. Yes, and what I was talking about last week is something that's a well-established fact for Jewish practices. Now, typically a Jewish practice for a burial is that they go, and especially back in those days, they wanted to get you in the ground before nightfall, and for the most part, over a period of time, because most people don't know when they're going to die, okay, they kept at their house or had access to a lot of spices. And so since you don't know when you're going to die, your family would go back to your house and would get the spices or so that you had prepared for yourself and go ahead and get you buried. Remember now that Mary Magdalene came and did what? Anointed Jesus in Bethany with what? I guess in King James, a spikard of nard, a pure nard, a spice that she spent a lot of money for, and that was probably something there that she kept that's going to be used when she died. Okay, and what the spices did was basically stop the flow of blood. If you happen to fall and you're bleeding or something like this, a lot of times the spices, yes, made you smell good, okay? Because most people who have been dead for some time don't smell good, okay? But it also stopped the flow of blood. So that is the key to a lot of this, because if there was excessive blood flow, you were not allowed to clean that body before it was put away. And there was a lot of, we would say today, medical reasons for that, because as you know, if you're subject to a lot of bleeding, there's sickness and disease and infection and whatever that can come upon you. Okay, that's why your doctor and your nurses use latex gloves when they handle you. Well, they didn't have that back then, okay? And so that's one reason why the Jewish society was a little bit more advanced in certain areas. They didn't know why, but God had them with very strict rules of how they dealt with blood. The other pagan societies, they didn't know what to do, and a lot of times there was a lot of sickness and disease in the camps of their enemies, okay, and they didn't know why, but there wasn't the same kind of sickness and disease in the Jewish camps. Why? Because they dealt with blood and death in a whole different way, okay? And so last week we also talked about the fact that because of the fact that Jesus still, his body, there was still blood flowing from different wounds in his body and essentially all over because of the scourging, okay? When they put that shroud over him, okay? Like if you think of a big long tablecloth, okay? And you had that tablecloth out flat, you would fold that over him. And so the fold would be basically at his head, and his feet was tied, all right? And there was something else that the Jews did. They had a face cloth. Just like if you've seen some movies of people being executed. Sometimes there's a hood over their head so you don't see the contortion. Well, they had a hood they would call this a sudarium, all right, or handkerchief or sweat cloth that was over the head of Jesus. So when they pulled him down off the cross, and so they have the face cloth and then they have the shroud. Well, because there was so much blood on the shroud and on that face cloth, guess what? Many years later, that's what's on the Shroud of Turin and what they call the Sudarium of Oviedo in Spain. They have the face cloth, and you can look this up. It's there in your notes. You can look this up on Google, okay? And you can find out about those two very important pieces of relic, okay? And as some of you know, over the years that there have been many people try to disprove those two items, but they can't do it. You know, many years ago, there was this about 3 different laboratories that were doing studies on the threads, but the threads that they were given were threads where the shroud was being repaired because of a fire in the cathedral, okay, what, in 1500s or something like that. And they said, oh, this is just bogus. It's this stuff's from the Middle Ages. Well, you know, it's not. And with all the tech stuff they got nowadays, they absolutely cannot disprove this. And if you go back and you look on some different websites, and there's a website for the shroud, you can see the 3D imaging of somebody, okay, and we all know it's Jesus, but somebody who was absolutely, you know, scourged, his entire body was just ripped up, and but they, guess what? They got the nail prints on the wrists and then in the ankles. You know, they've got the spear in the side, which corresponds with everything. So I mean, they just can't disprove it. But my point is to you this evening and from last week is that if Jesus was there for normal Jewish burial, that blood would have been gone and would not be able to be soaked into the relics that we have today. So let me read this here from Deuteronomy and these other couple notes here, and then I want to finish up from last week because we got some good stuff. Because guess what? We haven't let you guys out yet. Because there's some stuff in here about you guys that you need to pay attention to. So Deuteronomy 21, 22, and 23, reading from the English Standard Version. And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree or a cross, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. And you shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Now, the other thing is, and I say to you, I give you permission to edit your Bible, okay? Hope you all got your attention there. You can edit your Bible. What made Jesus ineligible is several different things. But one of the biggest things here that made him ineligible for a regular Jewish burial, but made him eligible to be crucified, was the fact that Jesus is being crucified as somebody who is a revolutionary, a seditionist. Yes. Now, what made Jesus ineligible? There's 4 things here, but the biggest thing we're going to talk about here just briefly. Number 1, bodily fluids were flowing freely from the body. He died in a violent manner for a religious crime. He was killed by a non-Jew. He was an outcast from Jewish society. But the biggest thing is Jesus was convicted as a rebel against Rome and the Jews by the Romans, crucified by non-Jew, the Romans, in a violent manner, the scourging and the crucifixion by non-Jews, and of course, blood was flowing profusely from his body. Now, what I want you to understand, and again, you can make a little note on your margin of your Bible, or take some white out and put it on your cell phone or whatever it is that you're reading from, okay? Yeah, put some white out on the screen of your iPad or something, But the thing is that robber is not the right term. So we say, it all starts with the fact that most Bibles interpret incorrectly the Greek word describing the criminals crucified on either side of Jesus as robbers or thieves. They could have been along with a list of other crimes, but the Greek word lestis means brigand or unscrupulous marauder, malefactor, exploiting the vulnerable without hesitating to use violence. But the word lestis in Greek means revolutionary. So because the Romans did not crucify people for thievery, they crucified people as an example. Why? Because they were uprisers. They were plotting against Rome. They were trying to overthrow Rome. They were a threat to Pontius Pilate. They were a threat to Herod. Okay? Not because they were thieves. So let me read these two verses here, Matthew 27:44. Most Bibles say, and the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. That's the ESV. But like the New Living Translation, basically has it right. Even the revolutionaries who were crucified with him ridiculed him in the same way. So Jesus was crucified as a revolutionary. That's why they had to keep sending Jesus back and forth between the Jews and the Roman officials, because the Roman officials didn't have anything that they could crucify him for. Whether, that he was something, that he violated something of the Jews didn't make any difference to Pilate. He had to find something that he could crucify him for. And so finally, he did it as a revolutionary. He's coming against Rome, and there's a whole other story I'll tell you to you sometime. But let me get down here. Let's see here. It's all about the blood. Let me read this here, down the bottom of page 2. So Jesus is being crucified as a revolutionary. Well, let me read this from Skip Moen, and then we'll get down to point number 2 down there. Why is it so important about crucifying robbers? This is from Skip Moen. If you ever want to have a word for the day, go to Skip Moen's website. He'll give you a good word for the day. Rome did not crucify men for theft. That means that the two men on either side of Yeshua, or Jesus, on the cross were not there because they robbed someone. No, crucifixion was reserved for the crime of sedition. Men who were crucified were those who fought against the power of the Roman Empire. The man who was released by Pilate was not a thief. That is Barabbas. Barabbas was not a thief. He was a revolutionary, an insurrectionist, a political criminal. When Yeshua was crucified, he was executed as someone who stood against Rome, who was viewed as a rebel. So let's move on down here where it says it's all about the blood, because it's always about the blood. Because life is in the blood, okay? The practical aspect of the flowing blood is the risk of contamination, disease, and infection from a bloody corpse left laying about. For the Romans and the Jews, it was the shock value of the onlookers. They wanted those people out there for the everyday person to see and say, I ain't coming up against the deep state. You would say that today. Look what they've done to President Trump. Look what they've done to Elon Musk. They're coming against them. So let me read this from a great book. I went and bought another copy of this. I gave this book away many years ago. The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning by a guy named Maurice Lamb. And this is from like 1968. And he goes through here talking about burial. The typical Jew, this is a New York Jew writing. So you can't get much more Jewish than someone from Brooklyn, New York. Okay. Let's see here. One of the many sources of Jewish burial customs pertaining to violent death can be found in Maurice Lamb's book. Okay, this is right here. This is in, actually, I'm going to go read another part in here. He says, and he's talking about, this is a typical thing. They trim your toenails and fingernails, and they clean up underneath your fingernails. All this kind of good stuff. I mean, just little details of whatever. But not so when there's a lot of blood. Now remember now too, let me just say this. Remember now too, the Jews, when they executed somebody, they did what? They stoned them. So there would be minimal blood loss. There would be some bruising, but you wouldn't have you would have minimum blood loss. Remember now, when talking about the prophecies of Jesus, they looked upon him who was pierced, blood loss. Well, that wasn't Jewish. They had to be Roman, okay? So the only people that would be able to have a significant blood loss, unless you had like an accident, someplace, or you were in battle, whatever. But now you're talking this kind of crucifixion, and there's significant blood loss. The blood that flows at the time of death may not be washed away. When there is other blood on the body that flowed during lifetime from wounds or as part of the operation, the washing and the tahara, that's the ritual, are performed in the usual manner. When the deceased died instantaneously through violence or accident, and his body and garments are completely splattered with blood, no washing or tahara is performed. The body is placed in the casket without the clothes being removed. Only a sheet is wrapped around or over the clothes. The blood is part of the body and may not be separated from it in death, because the life is in the blood. That's your blood, that's your life. Where only part of the body was injured and covered with blood, it is possible to perform a tahara on the remainder. Rabbinic authority should be consulted. Where the blood flows continually after death, think about this with Jesus, blood flowing after death, from like the wound in the side, as an example. The source of the flow is covered and not washed. The clothes which contain the blood that flowed after death are placed in the casket at the feet. So, just a little bit here from this book. This is fairly boring. If you want to read something to put you to sleep at night, you could probably read this kind of thing here.
So it's not a New York bestseller? Right?
Yeah, it was not on the New York bestseller Times list, no. But again, it's all about the blood. It's all about the blood, the lifeblood. Lifeblood mentioned in the Old Testament as defined by the Mishnah, that's the codified oral traditions, refers directly to Leviticus 17:11. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves at the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. It is important to note that what a rabbi said, why that constitutes the lifeblood. He said, it is inferred that the blood which issues at the moment of death, the lifeblood, is the blood that makes atonement. Here, this rabbi was talking about the animal sacrifice. But for us, we understand that it's Christ's blood that atones for us, so it had to flow freely. Think about this. This is the comparison he's making. He's saying, and he didn't know he was making this at the time, but what the rabbi was saying is that when the animal sacrifice is going on and that animal is bleeding, that's its lifeblood that's making atonement. So Jesus had to bleed freely and openly. Why? To make atonement for us. Y'all catch that parallel? Okay. Now, so the soldiers, there in John 19 and verse 24, so the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to his disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her to his own house. And then 19 and verse 38 and 39. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for the fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he may take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. And Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. That's a lot. So again, this is the day of preparation. This is for Lou, okay, this is the eve of Passover. So why is that important for us? Because there's a burden that we bear as followers of Jesus. And this is the other part of Jesus being an insurrectionist, okay? You guys are complicit in his insurrection. Did you know that? You are complicit in his insurrection. Just like his family and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Those who removed, this is page 4 there, back of your notes. Those who removed the body of Jesus from the cross, carried it to the tomb, and later those who brought spices were in danger too. They endured a two-pronged stigma. They were both ritually unclean and could not participate in Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but they are also political targets. I want you to understand this. Those participants who carried the body of Jesus at such an important feast time were ritually unclean. What the Mishnah, okay, that's the oral tradition of the Jewish elders, mean by unclean in relationship to the flowing of blood. Uncleanness means touching, carrying by, or even the overshadow. That is, if you walk by a dead body and your shadow crosses it, okay, you be unclean. The individual rendered unclean, which means that he cannot enter the temple for a specific period of time and must, through appropriate ritual cleansing, become clean again so that he may enter the temple and worship. With regard to a corpse, the Mishnah is very specific. A man conveys uncleanness as a corpse only after his soul has gone forth. The corpse then is unclean to touch for about a year. So let me explain that. They know you got to bury somebody. And their thinking on burying is very different than ours. We know as Christians that to be, absent from the body is be present with the Lord. That ain't so with a lot of cultures. And it ain't so with the Jews. You ain't dead until all your flesh rots off your bones. Let me say that again. You ain't dead until all your flesh rots off your bones. Your soul still could be there. Okay? And so after about a year, when all your bones or all your flesh is rotting off your bones, then you're not unclean anymore. And your bones can be gathered up. That's what they're talking about. And it's a little different than what we think about, okay? They didn't have viewings at a funeral home like we do, okay? But here's the other part here. To be minimally protected from disease and infection, a corpse is carried on what we would call a stretcher. They would carry basically a person on a stretcher. Then the head was wrapped with a smaller cloth, like a handkerchief. Then the body would be folded, starting at the head to the feet in a large shroud. Many ancient cultures, not just the Jews, believe that you are not dead until all your flesh rotted off your bones. So have a stone rolled in front of your tomb was to keep you undisturbed in your death and slumber so that your flesh would have an easier time rotting off. It's very interesting. I know this is very weird stuff that Lou reads. If you were an insurrectionist or some other type of criminal, you are buried in a mass grave outside the city of Jerusalem. Your bones might be recovered after 1 year, so your flesh was gone. Roman Emperor Octavian Augustus said, the bodies of the crucified were the business of vultures. But here's the other part I want to say to you. You were also a political target. All you people wearing MAGA hats, political target. The faithful who attended to Jesus and his crucifixion had a cross on their backs too. Tacitus, okay? the Roman historian, stated that neither relatives nor acquaintances were allowed to come close to mourn them, that is to condemn, or even to look at them any longer. There were guards posted around, closely watching to see if anyone betrayed any signs of mourning. So in other words, Jesus' family who came weren't supposed to be there, but somehow the Roman guards let them through. And if they were showing excessive mourning, then that meant that they were in sympathy with Jesus as an insurrectionist. So let me finish this quote from Tacitus. Even for women, no exceptions were made, since they could not be accused of treasonous intent. They were accused because of their tears. Roman historian Suetonius added that mourning was a dangerous act of solidarity that could lead to the mourner being crucified himself. This did not protect women. So, this is more important than you thought, huh? And this is something else too. We're going to finish up here in the next 60 seconds. There are many extra biblical sources for the crucifixion of Jesus. A lot of times you tell your friends or somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, well, the Gospels say this. Well, they don't accept the Gospels because it's some circular argument. But there are several Roman and Jewish sources that talk about the crucifixion of Jesus. I mean, it's recorded. The Romans are very good records keepers about this. So, let me finish up. So Mary, the mother of Jesus, Martha, Mary Magdalene, James, John, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, and many others who helped were criminally liable participants in Jesus' sedition. Today, too, certain countries and government agencies do not want you to get near the blood of Jesus. And so things haven't changed a whole lot in the last couple thousand years. So I hope this was fascinating for some things. It was interesting to me, but I'm not telling you, this is not unbiblical. It's just some Jewish tradition I just thought was fascinating. And it implies an awful lot for us today. So, after this, I started looking at some things. I thought, well, I think this might be worthwhile. But I think I want to look at next few weeks the resurrection appearances of Jesus, the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, because because that's what it's all about. I'm sure everyone's asked somebody here, do you believe in Jesus? And they say, oh yeah. And you start talking to them a little bit more and they think Jesus was a good man. He taught some good things or whatever. But the crux of the matter is, what do you do with the resurrection? That's the crux of the matter. You can believe in Jesus all you want to, but if he didn't rise from the dead, it don't mean anything. So we're going to talk about, I think, just like 13 resurrection appearances and some other things. So we're going to look at that. Any questions from anybody? Thank you all so much for coming. God bless you. We'll talk at you later. Thank you.
On behalf of our pastor and staff here at OAG, we want to say thank you. Thank you for being a part of our ministry. We are grateful for you and the support you give our church and its ministries so that we can continue to do what God has called us to do, to be the family church for the family of God. For more content from Oxford Assembly of God, check out our media website at oag.church/media.